everyone. This is Annika, and yeah, sorry for not being here with you in this meeting. I'm currently traveling between Kenya and Uganda. Otherwise, I would have loved to be here with you real time. But let me thank Veronica and everyone from TONIPASH for the invitation and for organizing this very interesting event. And I'll look forward also later to see the recording and hear from all the other amazing speakers on this panel. And yeah, so again, my name is Annika. I work for the UN Environment Program. I'm based in Kenya, Nairobi. And here we've been working for quite a few years now on a global electric mobility program, which is supporting right now over 50 countries with the transition to electric mobility. I was asked to talk a bit about, in general, the challenges for clean mobility and opportunities, and then I'll go a bit into how UNEP is supporting countries with the transition and why this is important. So it's just the content slide. So why are we talking about this topic in Africa? So the number of vehicles is growing rapidly. And it's set to double by 2050, as you can see in the graph here. And most of this growth will happen in non-OECD countries, which not includes the African countries, but also Latin American and Asian countries. And this will mean that the contribution of the transport sector to global emissions is going to increase. That many of the conventional vehicles that are currently being used in OECD countries will end up in countries where the transition to electric vehicles is not as fast. And in Africa, actually, we talk a lot about electric two-wheelers because of the very high import numbers, as you can see here. And also, it means that the market growth in two-wheelers will actually mean that the motorcycles will surpass the number of private cars by 2040. This is just a study from McKinsey, which shows the relationships for countries, including Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Uganda, I think. So yeah, this is just to show you the numbers. And then this will lead, as I mentioned before, to a rise in global transport emissions, which is why this is an important topic for the UN Environment Program. And you can see here that the highest growth in emissions will be from road transport. But we don't only talk about the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which are important for the climate, but also for local air pollution. As you can see in the graph, this is an example from Nairobi, Addis, and Kampala of the levels of air pollution for areas in the city. And you can see that in all cases, it's above the recommended World Health Organization standard for air quality. And this is not only due to vehicles, but in a huge extent. So what are the solutions to decarbonizing road transport in Africa? So this statistic is from the International Energy Agency, which shows the huge growth in electric cars. And here we talk about passenger four-wheelers. And as you can see here, the growth is happening mostly in China, Europe, and the United States. But it's happening exponentially. And right now, last year, the number was already at 10 million vehicles, up from about 0 just 10 years ago. And in some emerging markets, we see a similar trend. As you can see on the left side, in Africa, the number of vehicles and also the number of electric vehicle models is still very low, though growing. But you can also see how the huge growth in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Eastern Europe, which can just predict that the same will happen in Africa. This is a projection from the OECD on a number of vehicles by vehicle types. So this is like the first time, because I said like most of the statistics always include only electric passenger vehicles, while this one disaggregates the number of vehicles by types, including buses and two and three wheelers. And here you can see the different scenarios. So this means the B2DS means staying below the 2-degree target from the climate agreement in Paris, whereas the other one is a slower scenario. And here you can see that according to the scenario, by 2040, for example, there will be no more conventional powered electric two and three wheelers on the market. But if we talk about decarbonizing transport, it's not enough to only electrify the vehicles, because there's also other challenges such as resource consumption, land consumption, the production of these vehicles, and also other social aspects, right? That not everybody has access to a private car. And this is just what this graphic shows from UN Habitat. So usually in transport, when we talk about the environmental impacts and decarbonization, there is the ASI approach. So avoid means mostly urban planning and demand management for transport, so that we avoid the need to travel at all, which of course is the lowest emission mode, just not travel. And we have seen it a lot also now, no, like I'm not with you in Nigeria or somewhere, but no, we can stay in our countries and do video conferences, which is one avoid strategy that has been very prominent during COVID. Then there's the shift. That means changing the mode of transport, so from using a private car to public transport or walking and cycling. And then the last, where mostly electric vehicles fall in, it's the improved strategy. So if I'm taking a car or a motorbike, can this be electric? But we don't only talk just about the shift in technology, but also how a transition to a new system can be used to change, in general, how we plan and design our cities. For example, if we now introduce a new bike sharing system, right, how can we make also provide for bicycle lanes, for example, give priority to bicycles over private cars, and also offer interesting pricing solutions for customers, right, such as subscription-based leasing and so on, and then increase the general accessibility for the citizens. But then what are the main barriers to the transition to electric mobility? So we usually group them into 4 areas. One is the regulatory institutional side, which is often lack of coordination between different agencies. For example, we talk e-mobility, it means electric, so it's Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Transport, but also urban planning, and also municipal organizations and transport authorities. So all these actors have to work together for this transition. Also that electromobility, since it's a sort of new mode, it's not included in most of the existing transport policies and plans. So this is something that we support in a couple of countries, for example, to include the topic of electromobility in transport plans. Then there are the economic and financial barriers, which is that usually electric vehicles have a higher upfront cost, but then lower operational cost, where interesting business models come in, such as pay as you go. And also, but also on the good side, that if, for example, the fuel prices goes up, as it does now, electric vehicles become much more attractive. Then we have the issue of behavior and knowledge, which is often that people are not aware that these vehicles are available, or there's anxiety that the range will not be enough to reach the destinations. And then there's the topic of technical barriers, which is where we focus on a lot in our global working groups through the program. How can we, for example, support the development of standards for high quality vehicles, support interoperability between charging infrastructure, but also between countries, for example, that an electric two-wheeler on the roads in Kenya would also be able to be imported, for example, to Uganda or Nigeria. Then the connection with the electricity grid, and a lot of is on capacity building. So how can we also ensure that transition to mobility is just, and that people that, for example, right now work in the maintenance or operations of petrol diesel vehicles can be trained on electric vehicles. But yeah, what is e-mobility? So I think many of you probably know, so I'm just not going to go in details here. Just to show that the difference is they don't have an internal combustion engine, and their range depends on the battery, which is why I mentioned before that battery standard is also important. And then that also depends then on their range depends on the climate conditions, the weight of the battery. Now, for example, in a vehicle, if we use air conditioning, of course, the range would be lower. Then in general, it's more efficient because it's fueled directly by electricity. That's why we also don't include hybrid vehicles in our program usually, because they are using both systems, which means higher resource intensity and less efficiency. You need charging. So the vehicle either has its own onboard charger or an external charger, or the battery is being removed and charged and inserted back into the vehicle. And they're available for almost all modes. Yeah, it has fewer components, as I mentioned before, And the main difference is the refueling versus the recharging, which the main barrier is that charging usually takes longer, but this then depends on the battery type and whether the charging is done at the vehicle or externally through a battery swapping system. Yeah, this is just to show the different types. When we talk about electric vehicles, we don't only talk about passenger cars, as I mentioned before, but all other modes. No, rail has been electrified in many countries before. Fleet operations are very good as a pilot project, for example, because then they can be charged, for example, at office spaces or government sites. The issue of ride-hailing fleets is also, I know many ride-hailing operators are switching to electric because of the lower operational cost and due to that they have a high mileage. So of course the savings are much higher. And yeah, and that's also why the two-wheelers are electrifying the fastest. So in the pilot countries here, most of the two-wheelers are used for commercial purposes. So as I mentioned before, if they're used in high-use scenarios such as passenger transport or freight transport, of course, the total cost of ownership will be lower because the operational costs are lower, and the higher upfront cost can be overcome in a shorter time. And also there's a higher fleet turnover because higher use also means they need to be retired earlier in general. And then just another topic going a bit beyond what is done in cities. So there's also solutions for immobility in rural areas where, for example, vehicles can also be used to, or the battery of a vehicle can be used to charge other applications, right, such as lamps or cooking appliances. So there's also lots of innovative pilot projects going on right now where there can be connected to mini grids. So yeah, that's just to show that there's lots of applications for electric mobility. And yeah, and after talking all about the electric two-wheelers, I also want to mention bus fleets. So there's many, let's say, pilots all around the world on electrifying bus fleets because they move a lot of people. And the technology has definitely been proven, for example, in China, in Chile. And it's also apparently a nicer driving experience for the driver, and the whole transport is much smoother because the electric vehicles, there's no noise, there's no fast acceleration due to gear switching, so that means that the whole travel experience is more comfortable. And yeah, what I hinted on before, so it's not only about the vehicle, but it also is important that we consider the charging infrastructure, the integration with the electricity grid, and also the policy side. So this all addresses basically the barriers that I mentioned earlier, that all these different aspects need to be taken into consideration and worked with different entities, policymakers, utilities, private companies, OEMs, and charging infrastructure providers, and of course the general population. So why immobility in Africa? No, because many say, okay, there's also a lack of reliable electricity access in many countries. So yeah, just that immobility can contribute to many of the sustainable development goals, as you can see here, because it does not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also air pollution. It can make transport more affordable if the operating costs are lower. It can increase efficiencies, and it's an opportunity to develop more just and socially acceptable mobility systems. So what are the macroeconomic benefits? So this is just to show that there's high government subsidies in many countries on fossil fuels, which of course can be reduced if less fuel is being imported into the country. This is just an example for Kenya, for example. We calculated a cost-benefit analysis for taxation, and actually it came out that there will be very high savings if Kenya would only electrify the 2- and 3-wheelers. So this doesn't consider buses or private cars, but only 2- and 3-wheelers. And you can see that the savings are very high in a low and in a high growth scenario, which just means that the macroeconomic benefits are there. But then also there's the environmental benefits. As I said, there's a reduction in CO2 emissions, especially in many African countries where the grid is powered by renewable energies. Then there's also the attractiveness to the driver, which this matrix shows that already in at least 15 African countries, electric motorcycles are commercially attractive because of lower operating costs, which is at the attractive to the driver, and because of the reduction in CO2 emissions, which is measured by the renewable energy matrix. And yeah, so but for the driver in the end, not this personal savings will be the most important. And there can be seen, so the darker the blue, the higher the savings per kilometer for the driver, which depends on a mix of fuel and electricity price. And then this is just to show like kind of the how this total cost of ownerships is being measured. So like, no, it's not only the purchase of the vehicle, but also the maintenance, the operational cost, the residual value. And then the end, you can see, even though the locally assembled petrol motorbike is cheaper on the upfront cost, but over 5 years, it's actually more expensive than the electric version. And yeah, and this is something that I think probably the other speakers will also talk about. So there's already many projects on the continent where electromobility is being, let's say, piloted in different vehicle modes with policies. And yeah, and I'm just hoping that this map will get fuller and fuller as we move along. And yeah, and this is finally just to say how UNEP is supporting countries in the transition to electromobility. So we have this Africa Support Investment Platform, which provides technical support and training to countries and cities on the topics around electromobility. We have a monthly training offer. We have a help desk where we get requests from stakeholders that want to learn more about electromobility. We have communities of practice where we try to connect, for example, different suppliers of electric to three-wheelers to exchange knowledge and also see how, for example, vehicles piloted in one country can be used in other countries. And then we're also working right now to establish marketplaces to mobilize more financing into the sector, which will then host not different banks and financiers, but also bigger OEMs that can supply vehicles to the continent, just to show that there is a market, and also see, for example, what size the market needs in order to grow. If there can be several countries or cities that can aggregate their demand on electric buses, there will be higher interest from OEMs, of course, to supply these vehicles to the country. And yeah, this is the training curriculum I mentioned. So I want to highlight especially this training on management, reuse, recycling, and disposal of EV batteries. So this is going to happen mid-October, and I'll once I have the link, I'll share it with Veronica to pass it on to the audience team. We'd be happy, as it's a 4-day virtual session on different topics around batteries. So we're very excited to have you there. And then this is a link to our e-mobility toolbox, where we constantly update presentations and tools that are being developed within the program. And yeah, this is not just a UNEP initiative. We work with many partners globally to collate the expertise that is out there from many international organizations. And yeah, that's it from my side. There's an email address you can contact if you have any further questions or ideas, suggestions, or needs and challenges that you would like to share with us, and then we can see how we can work together. And yeah, again, unfortunately, I can't be there right now. If I can, I'll connect and listen in or answer questions later via email. I'm wishing you a great event, and goodbye. Ciao.